The hydraulic excavator's steel teeth bite into the cracked asphalt, with a grinding echo that cuts through the Arizona heat. Each impact sending vibrations through the abandoned gas station's foundation, while dust rises in thick columns that smell of petroleum residue and 70 years of desert winds. Sound of hydraulic arms extending under pressure. The demolition crew from Flagstaff has been working this stretch of Route 66 for 3 weeks now, tearing down the forgotten monuments of America's golden age of highway travel. And this particular station, a sun-bleached shell with broken pumps and shattered windows, was supposed to be just another 8-hour job on their schedule. The foreman, a man named Dutch Carmichael, whose grandfather once drove fuel tankers along this very road during the Eisenhower administration, stands near the excavator's cab with his arms crossed, watching the bucket tear through layers of tar and concrete that have been baking under the sun since the interstate system made this place obsolete in 1978. Sound of metal scraping concrete. But then the bucket hit something that doesn't sound like earth or broken foundation. A deep metallic resonance that makes Dutch raise his hand in a closed fist, the universal signal to stop everything. And the operator kills the diesel engine so suddenly that the silence feels like a physical pressure against their eardrums. What the bucket has exposed is a steel plate, approximately 12 feet square, flush with the subgrade beneath where the station's hydraulic lift bays once stood, and the metal shows no signs of rust despite decades underground, its surface protected by what appears to be a chromium-vanadium alloy coating that still holds a mirror finish in the harsh afternoon light. Dutch approaches slowly, his boots crunching on fragments of broken asphalt, and when he kneels beside the plate, he can see precision-cut edges that speak of military-grade fabrication, the kind of work that doesn't belong under a civilian gas station from the 1950s. Sound of boots on gravel. His crew gathers around as he brushes away the remaining debris with his gloved hands, revealing a recessed handle mechanism and what looks like a combination lock assembly embedded in the steel's surface, its brass components still gleaming despite the years. The crew exchanges glances that mix curiosity with the kind of unease that comes from finding something that was clearly meant to stay hidden, and when Dutch finally grips the handle and pulls with both hands, the plate doesn't budge, its hydraulic seals holding firm even after all this time. It takes them 40 minutes to cut through the locking mechanism with an acetylene torch, the blue-white flame spitting sparks that bounce off the metal plate like fireflies in the gathering dusk. And when the seals finally give way, they hear a hiss of escaping air that smells of argon gas and something else, something that reminds Dutch of his grandfather's garage where he used to work on vintage motorcycles. Sound of pressurized gas escaping. The plate lifts on counterweight hinges that still move smoothly, revealing a concrete staircase that descends into absolute darkness, its walls lined with the same corrosion-resistant alloy as the entrance plate. Dutch pulls a tactical flashlight from his belt and aims the beam down into the void, the LED light cutting through air that hasn't moved in decades, and what he sees makes him freeze with his boot hovering over the first step. At the bottom of the stairs, perhaps 20 feet down, the flashlight beam catches the reflection of chrome and something else, something that glows with a warm metallic sheen that can only be one thing. The descent is slow and deliberate, each crew member's breathing echoing in the confined space while their flashlights create moving shadows on the concrete walls, and the temperature drops with every step until they can see their breath misting in the beam patterns. Sound of footsteps on concrete stairs. When Dutch reaches the bottom and steps into the chamber beyond, his flashlight sweeps across a space roughly the size of a high school gymnasium, its ceiling supported by steel I-beams that show no signs of stress or settling. But what fills the space is something that belongs in a museum or a fever dream, not buried under a forgotten gas station on Route 66. Arranged in 4 perfect rows of 13 motorcycles each, sitting on custom-fabricated stands that hold them upright in display position, are 52 Harley-Davidson panhead motorcycles, and every single one of them has been completely covered in what appears to be gold plating, their frames and tanks and fenders gleaming under the flashlight beams like artifacts from some wealthy king's tomb. Sound of multiple flashlight switches clicking. Dutch moves forward slowly, his crew fanning out behind him with their lights creating overlapping pools of illumination across the golden machines. And as he approaches the nearest motorcycle, he can see that this isn't some cheap gold paint job or electroplating done in someone's garage. This is high-purity gold leaf applied over precision-prepared surfaces, each panel showing the kind of craftsmanship that would have cost more than most Americans made in a year back in 1955. The chrome components, the handlebars and mirrors and exhaust pipes, have been left in their original finish, creating a striking contrast against the warm glow of the gold that makes each motorcycle look like a ceremonial object rather than a machine built for the road. He reaches out and touches the nearest tank with his fingertip, feeling the cold smoothness of the metal. And when he pulls his hand away, there's a perfect print in the fine layer of dust that covers everything down here. Sound of leather glove brushing against metal. The air quality meter that one of the crew members has been holding beeps softly, its digital display showing oxygen levels at 18% and trace amounts of argon and nitrogen, the telltale signature of a professionally sealed preservation chamber. This isn't just a hiding place, Dutch realizes as he walks slowly between the rows of golden motorcycles, examining the identical panhead engines and the hand-stitched leather saddles that still look supple despite the decades. This is a time capsule built with the kind of resources and technical knowledge that suggests military involvement or serious money from the automotive industry. Each motorcycle is positioned exactly 3 feet from its neighbors, creating perfect aisles that allow for movement and inspection. And when Dutch crouches down to examine the concrete floor, he can see drainage channels cut into the surface, a gravity-fed ventilation system designed to prevent any accumulation of moisture or corrosive gases. Sound of air moving through concrete channels. Whoever built this chamber understood preservation engineering at a level that wouldn't become common knowledge until the 1970s, and they had access to enough gold to cover 52 motorcycles in a coating that Dutch estimates must be at least 10,000ths of an inch thick. 4 seconds of absolute silence, sound of desert wind above ground. The crew sets up portable work lights on telescoping stands, and as the chamber floods with bright LED illumination, the true scope of what they've found becomes overwhelming. Each panhead is a 1948 to 1955 model, representing the entire production run of Harley-Davidson's first overhead valve big twin engine, and every one of them appears to be in showroom condition beneath the gold coating. The fuel tanks still hold gasoline that Dutch can smell when he carefully opens one of the caps, the old petroleum mixture giving off that distinctive sweet smell of leaded fuel that hasn't been available for decades, sound of metal gas cap unscrewing. The tires are original equipment, their rubber showing the characteristic checking and hardening of 7 decades, but still holding air pressure that suggests they were inflated to specification before the chamber was sealed. One of the crew members, a younger guy named Marcus who rebuilds vintage Indians in his spare time, walks slowly along the first row with his phone out, taking pictures that don't do justice to the surreal golden fleet. Dutch moves to the far wall where a steel workbench sits under a layer of undisturbed dust, its surface holding tools that look like they were set down yesterday and never picked up again. There's a torque wrench calibrated in foot-pounds, a set of feeler gauges still in their leather case, and a logbook bound in oiled canvas that Dutch picks up with careful hands, sound of stiff canvas pages separating. The entries inside are written in precise mechanical pencil, each line documenting work done on the motorcycles between March 1954 and September 1955, and the handwriting belongs to someone who understood these machines at a fundamental level. The entries describe valve adjustments and carburetor tuning and timing chain tensioning, all recorded with the kind of obsessive detail that suggests these weren't just motorcycles to their caretaker. They were something close to religious artifacts. But there's no name attached to the entries, no signature or identification mark, just the methodical documentation of maintenance work performed on machines that were apparently being prepared for very long-term storage. The mystery deepens when Marcus calls out from the third row, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with an edge of excitement that makes everyone turn to look. He's kneeling beside one of the motorcycles with his flashlight aimed at the engine casing, and when Dutch walks over he can see what caught the younger man's attention. Engraved into the gold-plated rocker box cover, done with what must have been a precision rotary tool, are numbers and letters that form a sequence. NK7841 PHX55. Dutch examines the next motorcycle in line and finds a similar engraving, this one reading NK7842 PHX55, and when they check all 52 machines, they discover that each one carries a sequential identifier ending in the year 1955 and the airport code for Phoenix, sound of metal being tapped with a fingernail. The NK prefix means nothing to Dutch, but something about the systematic numbering and the Phoenix connection triggers a memory from his grandfather's stories about the wild days of post-war Arizona, when the desert became a haven for people trying to disappear from their past lives. The extraction process begins the following morning, after Dutch has made calls to his company's legal department and received reluctant permission to secure the site and document everything before any government agencies get involved. A specialist crew arrives from Tucson with equipment designed for handling valuable automotive artifacts, including a portable climate-controlled tent that they erect over the bunker entrance to maintain stable atmospheric conditions during the removal operation. Sound of aluminum poles being assembled. Each motorcycle is photographed from every angle, its serial numbers recorded, and its condition assessed by a vintage Harley expert who makes the 2-hour drive from Phoenix and stands in the chamber with his mouth hanging open for a full minute before he can form coherent words. The expert, a man in his 70s named Coleman Briggs who has been restoring panheads since 1968, confirms that these are genuine factory motorcycles, not custom builds or reproductions, and the quality of the gold application suggests it was done by someone with access to industrial plating facilities. The first motorcycle comes up the stairs on a custom dolly, designed to handle its weight without stressing the frame or suspension components. 4 crew members guiding it carefully while Coleman walks alongside with his hands hovering near the handlebars like a nervous parent. Sound of rubber wheels on concrete. When it emerges into the Arizona sunlight, the gold surface seems to ignite, throwing off reflections that make everyone squint and reach for their sunglasses. They wheel it into the climate tent where specialized cleaning equipment waits, and Coleman begins the delicate process of removing 70 years of dust without damaging the gold surface. He uses compressed air at controlled pressure, directing the flow across the tank and fenders at precise angles, and as the dust lifts away, the true color of the gold becomes visible, a rich buttery yellow that has none of the brassy harshness of cheap plating. Sound of compressed air releasing. Under magnification, Coleman can see that the gold coating was applied over a copper base layer, a technique that creates superior adhesion and allows the gold to follow every contour of the original steel surfaces. This level of work would have been phenomenally expensive in 1955, each motorcycle probably costing more to plate than a new Cadillac sold for on the dealer lot. By the third day, they have 20 motorcycles on the surface, arranged under the climate tent in rows that mirror their underground configuration, and Dutch has started to notice something odd about the engine casings. Each panhead motor carries its factory casting numbers in the usual locations, but when Coleman removes the primary covers to inspect the internal components, he finds additional markings that shouldn't be there. Stamped into the inner surfaces of the primary housing, where they would only be visible during a complete engine teardown, are coordinates that Coleman recognizes as latitude and longitude positions. Sound of socket wrench clicking. Dutch plots the first set of coordinates on a map and finds they point to a location near Kingman, about 200 miles west on Route 66. The second set points to a spot near Albuquerque in New Mexico. The pattern becomes clear as they document more engines. Each motorcycle carries coordinates for a different location along the Route 66 corridor between Chicago and Los Angeles, creating a geographic trail that spans the entire length of America's most famous highway. The breakthrough comes when Coleman removes the rocker covers from motorcycle number 26 and finds something sealed in a waterproof pouch tucked into the space between the cylinder heads. Inside the pouch is a photograph, the kind printed on thick paper stock that was common in the early 1950s, showing a man in his 40s standing beside an identical gold panhead in what appears to be an industrial facility. Sound of plastic seal being broken. The man wears mechanic's coveralls with a patch on the breast pocket, but the resolution isn't good enough to read the text. On the back of the photograph, someone has written in the same precise hand as the logbook, Phoenix, September 1955, the last one, NK. Dutch photographs the image and the inscription, then carefully seals the photograph back in its pouch and returns it to its hiding place in the engine. They decide to check every motorcycle for similar hidden items, a process that takes another full day and reveals 27 more photographs, each showing the same man at different locations along Route 66, always standing beside a golden panhead, the backgrounds changing from urban warehouses to desert workshops, to what looks like the interior of the very bunker where the motorcycles have been sleeping. 4 seconds of absolute silence, sound of leather creaking. Coleman Briggs makes calls to his contacts in the vintage motorcycle community, sending the photographs and asking if anyone recognizes the man or the NK initials. And within hours he gets a response that makes him sit down heavily on a folding chair in the climate tent. The man in the photographs is almost certainly Nathan Keller, a legendary custom motorcycle builder who operated out of Phoenix in the late 1940s and early 1950s, known for taking on impossible projects and delivering work that was decades ahead of its time. Keller had supposedly disappeared in September 1955, closing his shop without warning and leaving behind customers who had paid deposits on custom builds that were never completed. There were rumors at the time that Keller had gotten involved with the wrong people, that he had taken money from organized crime figures to build special motorcycles for a cross-country transport operation. But nothing was ever proven, and Keller was never seen again. The gold panheads were never mentioned in any of the stories about his disappearance, and nobody in the vintage community had any idea that such a collection existed. Dutch starts researching Nathan Keller and finds scattered references in old motorcycle magazines and newspaper archives, pieces of a story that suggest Keller was more than just a talented mechanic. He had served in the Army Corps of Engineers during World War II, working on classified projects that involved vehicle preservation and long-term storage techniques for military equipment in hostile climates. After the war, he had used his knowledge to build a reputation as the go-to person for wealthy collectors who wanted their motorcycles maintained in perfect condition for decades. The gold plating, Coleman explains as he continues cleaning the motorcycles, would have been Keller's insurance policy, a way to protect the steel surfaces from any oxidation or corrosion that might occur, even in a sealed environment. The argon atmosphere would prevent any chemical reactions, and the gravity-fed ventilation system would remove any moisture that might accumulate, creating preservation conditions that rival anything modern museums can achieve. The coordinates hidden in the engines lead Dutch and a small team on a road trip along Route 66, following the geographic trail that Nathan Keller left behind 7 decades ago. At each location they find abandoned buildings or empty lots where structures once stood, and at 3 of the sites they discover small brass plaques bolted to permanent concrete foundations, each plaque carrying the same inscription: NK, 1955, Witness. Sound of metal detector sweeping over concrete. The plaques are stamped with the same sequential numbers as the motorcycles, creating a physical connection between the Golden Fleet and specific locations along the highway. Dutch photographs each plaque and documents its position, building a map that starts to suggest a pattern. The locations correspond to sites of significant events in 1955, a bank robbery in Kingman that was never solved, a truck hijacking near Gallup where the cargo disappeared without a trace, a warehouse fire in Tucson that destroyed evidence in a federal investigation. The pattern suggests that Nathan Keller wasn't just building motorcycles, he was creating a permanent record of something that powerful people wanted forgotten. The final revelation comes when they remove the engine from motorcycle number 52, the last one in the sequence, and find hidden in its crankcase a sealed titanium cylinder about the size of a soup can. The cylinder has been professionally welded shut, its seams showing the kind of precision work that requires specialized equipment, and when they carefully cut it open in a controlled environment, they find a rolled manuscript on acid-free paper that has survived the decades in perfect condition. Sound of paper unrolling. The manuscript is Nathan Keller's confession, written in the same hand as the logbook, explaining everything. He had been approached in 1954 by a consortium of wealthy businessmen and government officials who were involved in a series of illegal operations along Route 66, using the highway traffic to move stolen goods and cash from various criminal enterprises. Keller had been hired to build a fleet of distinctive motorcycles that would serve as mobile witnesses, each one corresponding to a specific operation and carrying evidence of what had occurred. The gold plating was meant to make them valuable enough that they would be preserved, and the bunker was Keller's guarantee that if anything happened to him, the motorcycles would eventually be found, and the truth would come out. The manuscript includes names, dates, and detailed descriptions of crimes that range from bank robbery to federal evidence tampering, all of it documented with the same obsessive precision that Keller brought to his mechanical work. He explains that he sealed himself into the bunker in September 1955 after the consortium discovered what he was doing, spending his last days maintaining the motorcycles and writing his confession before the air supply ran out. The final entry in the manuscript is dated September 27, 1955, and reads simply, "The machines will speak when the time is right. NK. Sound of wind carrying dust across metal. Dutch and his crew stand in the climate tent surrounded by 52 golden panheads, each one a carefully preserved witness to crimes that occurred before most of them were born, and they realize they're not looking at a collection of vintage motorcycles anymore. They're looking at Nathan Keller's monument, a man who understood that the only way to defeat powerful people was to outlast them, to build something that would survive long enough to tell the truth when nobody could stop it anymore."